I'm going to start with the lesser given advice that's usually given at the end, which is that I think it's so important for healthcare professions to take care of their own well-being first, because there's a great risk of vicarious trauma, of burnout, and without going into too much detail, there's just the general sort of common sense advice of sleeping enough, eating well, getting exercise, maintaining good social connections, having hobbies and meaningful pursuits outside of your work. Because this is very heavy and difficult territory to work in, and one can easily become engulfed in other people's griefs, and then you're really of no use to anybody else. So first of all, take care of yourself and your own needs, and be very sensitive to your own experiences while you're working in this area. You know, and I also encourage people to know their limitations. You as a nurse or a doctor, you are not a counsellor, you don't have that training. That doesn't mean that you can't be enormously helpful, but also know when this is territory where it might be useful to refer someone else in to help with this or find some other support. That said, I do encourage people to use this work as a way to expand those limitations, explore those limitations. This is incredibly meaningful and fulfilling work, and this is a situation, these kinds of situations rather, can be a source of enormous personal growth. So don't, in the same way that we encourage patients not to shy away or live in denial of things, I would encourage people who work in this area to fully engage as a human being with what they're dealing with. I think it's so important that we connect to our patients and their family members as human beings. We connect through our shared sense of humanity, because all people experience loss, all people experience old age, sickness and death. And so while we may be looked at as experts or put on a kind of a pedestal above our patients, we really shouldn't think of ourselves that way, and I don't think it's always helpful for our patients that we do that. So one of the things that can be helpful, apart from educating yourself generally in this field, is to feel comfortable enough to educate your patients about these concepts. People don't know about grief. They don't know about anticipatory grief. So, you know, gently introducing them to these ideas, giving them the opportunity to talk about these things. People sometimes, and it may seem strange, but need permission to have their feelings, to talk about their feelings, to share their feelings. And you're in a position, when you've been given this sort of baton of authority, to allow them to talk about these things. And because you're in a position of trust, sometimes you're the only person that this patient or their family members may talk to, because they're not used to doing that with their family members or in their particular culture. So you have an enormous gift to offer by listening, by talking, by sharing, by letting this person know that you're not going to feel this way forever. This is a stage that you're going through. Because you're experiencing anticipatory grief, it doesn't mean that when, you know, the death happens or this person goes into the next phase of their life, that there won't be problems or that it won't be difficult. Particularly with death, people often think that, oh well, I'm preparing for it now and I'm rehearsing it so many times. I'm prepared for this to happen, and then when it does happen, it still hits them. It's still a shock. It's still an adjustment. So letting people know all these things can be incredibly comforting and can kind of lay out a roadmap for the people who are experiencing anticipatory grief. So in summary, I would say engage with your clients and your patients. Really be there for them as a human being as well as a healthcare professional, keeping the appropriate level of objectivity and distance, but without becoming too distant, too expert in the situation. And if you can just listen, really listen, non-judgmentally, with a degree of warmth and understanding, I think that you're doing an enormous good already. You don't even need to offer advice. For many people, it's just that opportunity to talk about what's happening with them, what they're feeling, their confusion, their fear. And being educated about this, knowing the resources available to you, knowing when to refer out and when to be a shoulder to cry on, when to be the expert, when to step back. It's complicated, but it's incredibly doable and helpful when you can strike those balance between those different roles that you play. And people tend to be very, very grateful for that support. For people who are experiencing anticipatory grief, especially caregivers, they're often left by the wayside. People don't ask them how they're doing. There's such a focus on the patient, and I think it's so important simply to say, how are you doing today? Are you okay? Are you feeling? If you want something, would you like to talk to me about this? I'd like to hear what's going on for you. Just that simple question, are you okay, can open so many doors for people. Very simply, I noticed that you're looking tired today. Have you been sleeping? Have you been eating? This is very difficult on you. Simply acknowledging that that person who is experiencing the anticipatory grief, acknowledging that they're having a hard time, can do so much to establish that relationship and that permission for them to feel and talk about what's going on for them. Well, it's really often difficult to decide when to refer out for a patient, but as a general rule of thumb, I would say when you see that there's an intense and ongoing period of extremely difficult emotional reactions to what's going on, then, and you can tell the person really isn't coping, they're not functioning in their everyday life, this is just all too much for them, then that might be a good time to provide some resources for the patient. But there's no hard and fast rule about this. There's no universal way to assess for anticipatory grief in healthcare settings. So there's a sense of judgment that has to be applied in this situation. Well, it's important to know that all these anticipatory grief reactions that we're talking about are completely normal. But again, they can be destructive, and once it becomes destructive to the person's relationship, to the quality of time that you have left with your family member, then that's when I would step in as appropriate and say, hey, you know that there is some help for you out there, we can talk about this. But, and this is my final point on this topic, I might say that as healthcare professionals, it's not our job to feel or to grieve for those people, nor can we. It's a very delicate balance between being engaged and responsive to what the patients and their family members need, and also having an appropriate distance. We really cannot be of any help if we're completely engulfed by our patients' grief and trauma. So that takes it full circle again back to take care of yourself in the process of trying to be there for your patients, and of course doing your job. If you're a nurse, at the end of the day, you've got to make sure that you're able to do those things well and first. Those are your primary responsibilities, and being there for them emotionally can be part of sort of your secondary response to what's going on. Fortunately, there are so many excellent resources out there, that people are often unaware of. So I think it's incumbent on us to know what's out there and be able to present that information to our patients and their family members. I think it might be helpful just for me to mention some of the resources and types of people that can be helpful in this situation. Social care workers, psychiatrists, spiritual care or pastoral counselling can be very helpful because of the existential nature of the experiences that people have. Psychologists and therapists, obviously. Something that's very useful, and a lot of people are surprised at how useful it is support groups, and which just give the ability for people to talk to other people going through a similar situation in a facilitated and structured way. Something that's important here in Australia particularly would be Aboriginal liaison officers, and when possible, as needed, practical resources can be very welcome for people who may need financial support as they're going through these situations. For people who want to learn more about grief and anticipatory grief and how to handle it, I would like to highly recommend the work of Dr. Alan Wolfelt, who is an educator and grief counsellor with about 40 years of experience, who's written a number of excellent books on all different aspects of grief and how to cope and what it is and everything you could possibly want to know. That's very much backed up with all his personal experience and the work that he's done with patients. So the first book would be really useful for the patients and their family members. It's called Expected Loss. What I like about Dr. Wolfelt's books are that they're really short when you're and simple and everyday language, right? Because when you're going through this, your energy levels are sapped. You're cognitively, you're not functioning at your best. Emotionally, you're at your most frayed. So what I love about his books, and I've shared them with many patients, with many friends, and I've used them myself, is that they're easy to digest. And you can take little bits at a time, little doses that can be really, really helpful in navigating this really complex and broad topic. And it's massive. There are so many different complex aspects to it. For people who are in the medical and caring industries, I would recommend another book that he wrote called Companioning the Bereaved, which has a bit more detail in it, but I would also say very helpful for caregivers themselves, but also for professionals. And then above and beyond that, you have several local organizations and websites, and there's a lot of information out there that's worth getting to know. I hope that people just take the time to educate themselves about what's out there, because there's such a broad array of things available, and so that you can kind of handpick what would be best to fit each situation.